Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. It is Thursday, May the 20th. I'm Rob Fowler, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. As always, I'm joined on this briefing by Brian Calley, our president. Brian, I hated missing Monday, and you had a lot to talk about, and it seems like the pace of this whole thing has not really slowed down. Lots of moving parts right now.
Yeah, and we have kind of a new dynamic at play. We saw it last Friday when we did a special briefing. There was an announcement made, and then later on an order came out. The interplay between the different agencies at the state level and the federal level, there are several conflicts that exist. So this week has really been, I know within state government itself, about trying to figure out how to harmonize those, how to repair the conflicts between the CDC guidance and MIOSHA workplace safety rules and the DHHS epidemic emergency orders. And we saw today a press release and a press conference by the governor that laid out some changes that we can expect, but the actual order will not be available until next week. But generally, the contents of the order is something that we felt pretty good about, at least as they have been described. So we're hopeful.
Yeah, we'll dig into that. I thought maybe it would be good for us to start by putting up this graphic of what has become known as My Vacc to Normal. 3 weeks ago today, the governor announced this new framework for sort of returning back to normal. And it was a 4-step process, really designed around hitting certain total population, eligible population vaccination goals. The first one at 55 we hit, and you and I spent a lot of time looking at vaccination numbers and trying to project when we might hit the next one. And I guess my first question to you is this dead? Is this gone as the context or the construct for getting back to normal?
Technically, the answer is no, but as a practical matter, the answer is yes. So the way that it was described today is that the epidemic emergency order will be that we expect to receive on Monday. It will say that capacity restrictions across the board for outdoors and masking requirements outdoors will be eliminated. So fairs, festivals, carnivals, things, just different big community events outdoors. Those are free to happen anytime after June 1st with no capacity limits at all. Also on June 1st, there was a change in terms of capacities. Right now, it was kind of industry specific. These don't have any capacity limits. Bars and restaurants at 50%, and gyms and fitness centers were at 30%. It's just different in meeting facilities, convention centers, wedding reception halls, KFC clubs. Different places like that had a hard cap of 25 people, no matter how big they were. So instead of the reopening happening here, at 60 and 65% on this Vacc to Normal plan, instead of that, it's just June 1st, everybody goes to 50% indoors. And then on July 1st, here's the big difference. July 1st is when all of the population-wide epidemic emergency orders expire. And the governor made it clear today that at that point, it's not a matter of, hey, we'll look at it and maybe they'll get extended, maybe they won't. They will expire on July 1st. That means that the capacity limits go together entirely, or go away entirely at that point. Now, what they said about the Vacc to Normal plan, because they were asked about it, was that, hey, if we hit 70% before July 1st, then all the population-wide orders will go away. We are not going to hit 70 or 65 or 60. Actually, we probably will hit 60 before then, but it won't matter. We won't hit 60. We won't likely hit 60% of adults vaccinated by June 1st. And the June 1st announcement that the governor had just made makes this 60% threshold here, the one that was most attainable, kind of null too. So technically it's still in play. If vaccinations really sped up over the next month and a half, this could come back into play, but as a practical matter, it won't matter.
So this is probably the last time we'll use this graphic, because it is, for all intents and purposes, the standard has changed. It's not percentage of eligible population vaccinated, it's time. And I think to our credit, to your credit, that has been something we've been asking for really from early on. Let's find a time certain, a date certain, really following in the path of a number of other states. And I think it's interesting to watch what's going on across the country. Our cases continue to drop. Our first doses continue to go up, albeit slower. As you look around the country, what are you seeing that may have informed the governor's decision making?
So what we have up on the screen now is a map of the United States and color coded by how things were before the governor's announcement and before the new order comes out on Monday. And so as you can look across it, green means there are states that they've already lifted their capacity limits. And that's, of course, most states. And then we have blue states here that sometime in May they've announced, hey, we're going to lift our capacity restrictions. And then in yellow are the ones that are sometime before July 4th. So that's what Michigan will join. They'll join the ranks of those before July 4th. But if you look, before this action was taken by the governor, there were only 7 states that didn't have at least a date certain when reopening would happen, when the mask mandate would be lifted, and when the capacity restrictions would be lifted. So this is going to this really is going to put Michigan more into the mainstream of where you see the rest of the country. It'll be toward the tail end in terms of lifting all the restrictions that are on businesses for capacities today. But I want to make really clear, though, that what we're talking about here is the population-wide epidemic emergency order. That's the one that said you got to wear, general public has to wear face masks. It's the one that says what capacity limits are. It is not the workplace safety rules. That is another set of rules, and that is one that the governor did not address today, but we think will be addressed very shortly, hopefully early next week. We know a lot of work has happened on it. I've had a lot of reach outs from the department, asking about different issues, talking about different possibilities. So I'm starting to frame up in my mind generally a direction that they will go, but it's not out yet. And so what that means is that even with the governor's press conference today, that the workplace safety rules have not changed. And we're hopeful it'll only be a few more days, Monday, maybe Tuesday, when those come out. And then when they do, we'll have to dig in. But here's what we're looking for in those, Rob. Here's what we've asked for. We'll see what happens next week. What we would like to see on those workplace safety rules is, first of all, for them to be streamlined. Right now, the workplace safety rules, they're different rules for different industries. And a lot of businesses don't neatly fit into one predefined industry. So it can cause a lot of inconsistencies on what the rules are for any particular business because of the way that they're drafted. So we'd like, for whatever workplace safety rules that they have, for those to be streamlined and more across the board, as opposed to a whole bunch of different rules for different industries. Number 2 is that we're looking for there to be a CDC reference, so that every time the CDC rules change, we don't have to rely on state government making, essentially deciding, hey, do we want to take this CDC loosening or not? We'd rather have that automatic. Operationalizing it will take some action by state government, but just the idea that, hey, CDC has changed one of the requirements to have that kind of automatically feed through the rules. So that's number 2. And number 3 is we are hopeful, and what we're asking for is that they do everything through their temporary emergency rules, that they not implement any permanent rules. And they have proposed permanent rules. We're hopeful. We're asking for them to take those off the table. So those are our main asks. I hope that we won't have too long a wait before that those answers are before us.
Well, it certainly seems like the case for making rules about social distancing and mask wearing and PPE and all those sort of things is going away quickly. The case for that being a permanent rule, the specter of that being the long-term new normal, I think is really frightening to, I would say, employers and employees as they look at the possibility that those could be the permanent rules. So, you know, it's interesting, and I think we have to watch to see what MIOSHA does. When do you expect that we might hear that piece? That's the source of the confusion for small businesses right now.
Yeah, I was hopeful that we would see something this week, but the fact that they announced the epidemic emergency order today, but announced that it will be released on Monday, that tells me that the workplace safety rules will not be before Monday. So I don't think that we're on watch for this week anymore. I don't think that there's really any chance that we'll see MIOSHA do like an independent announcement of something or a different timeline. In the meantime, I'm just kind of penciling in like, maybe we'll see something Monday or early next week on workplace safety rules. And all of those things that I talked about that we were looking for a more streamlined set of rules for that is CDC reference to flow through to the rules in a more automatic way, and also for the permanent rules to be withdrawn. I look at all of those as very realistic, and but who knows? I mean, there's several political lifetimes between now and Monday and Tuesday next week. So things could change. Maybe those things will get out of reach for some reason, but I'm hopeful that that's the direction that the state goes. And I think if they do that, it will put us kind of more toward the mainstream of what we see happening in other states.
And I think they've heard our voice in this whole thing, but just personally over the weekend and the last couple of days, I recognize that the public now thinks that every business's rules have changed, and the businesses are not in a position to change their rules yet. And it really does create some difficulty. I've just tried to respect whatever the business is doing at the time, and I hope the public will do that too until this gets worked out.
And one thing probably I think it makes sense to mention is that MIOSHA did put out a statement, at least as it pertains to face masks for employees, and essentially what they acknowledged that workplace safety rules require face masks in most indoor situations. What MIOSHA said was businesses who follow the revised epidemic emergency orders that do not require vaccinated individuals to wear face masks will be deemed to have, the wording they used was to have made a good faith effort to comply with the rules. I thought that's kind of a funny way of putting it, as opposed to saying have deemed to have complied. That's would have been stronger language, but I think they were sending a message like, hey, on the face masks part of it anyway, you can go ahead and implement the CDC guidelines and the epidemic emergency orders, and MIOSHA is not going to give you any trouble. All of the other stuff, though, we really do have to wait until next week to see how that's going to turn out.
All right. One thing we do know about Monday is that is the day, May 24th, when the sort of ban on office work being done in person, if could feasibly be done remotely, is gone. And that does mean a lot of businesses are thinking about getting back into their offices, into downtowns across the state. That'll make a difference, won't it?
It will. We know that there are many downtown areas near where our office is in Lansing. That whole business district there has struggled mightily throughout the epidemic. Places like downtown Grand Rapids and downtown Detroit, where there are tons and tons of office workers that just haven't been there. That traffic is gone. We don't expect that there's going to be a rush where it's just kind of like back everybody in the office, but this transition period is now free to start. And so I think we will see some things happen pretty quickly, but then it'll tend to grow over time as businesses decide which direction they want to go. So This is another reason, though, why I think that it's highly likely that the MIOSHA workplace safety rules will be out early next week, is because, well, office workers are heading back into the office, and what are the you got to know what the rules are, and so a business would at this moment be still using the old rules that are about to change. So that's why I was a little bit surprised we didn't hear about or see the MIOSHA workplace safety rules this week, because of that important day with office return being allowed next Monday. So, but that I can't imagine they're going to wait too much after that that time period. It's kind of a natural deadline where they really got to get that out.
All right, and what we hear is that the state office workers are coming back July 12th, and that's a big employer putting a stake in the ground on a date certain. That'll matter.
We heard from the Department of Technology Management and Budget that manages all the leases. We know that they've canceled some leases. We know that they are looking to downsize the total space that the state occupies, because some positions won't be coming back, but there are many positions that will be. And the fact that the state put out a date to state employees to let them know, hey, we're going to start our own transition back in the middle of July, was one of the reasons I was so bullish on the idea of these pandemic restrictions going away sometime before then, is because the internal decisions of state government really kind of hinted at that. But again, if I were the mayor of Lansing, I wouldn't expect, though, that you're going to see 40,000 or whatever it is, 40 state employees back in the office right away. I think that you're going to see a long-term transition where there's some things that happen early on, but many positions more toward the fall they'll figure out what works remotely and what doesn't. And I also think there are many employers that are content to let it settle a little bit and see what type of natural changes happen. And one thing I believe is that there's kind of a center of gravity in the office that's going to pull people back over time. And so, as opposed to expecting a light switch to be flipped, that this is probably a natural progression that's going to happen. People are going to want to be part of the action, part of the decision-making process, part of the camaraderie that happens in the office. So I think that it's the change might not be as dramatic as what it might seem in the beginning, but still, we've got a pretty long process there really to find out how it's going to turn out in the end.
Yeah. So one of the conversations we find ourselves having with our members, small business owners, more recently is really labor shortages, or the inability to get people to come to work. I think particularly restaurants and others are having this difficulty. One of the sort of contributors to that has been the supplemental unemployment compensation that people have gotten, and that sort of the requirement that you need to be searching for work by the Unemployment Insurance Agency. We've been hearing that the work search requirement is coming back. What can you tell us?
The department has right on the front page of their website that the work search requirement will come back by the end of the month, but it still says stay tuned for how they're going to operationalize that. So they're kind of giving notice when somebody files for this week's or certifies for this week's unemployment. They're putting right in the front of that message that this requirement is coming back. I think this is going to make a big difference. There are many people on unemployment that their only experience with unemployment is during this pandemic. And so they've never experienced an unemployment system that had an expectation that you're looking for work. That's how it's always been in the past, but for the last year, it has not been a requirement. Now, I want to make sure, though, that we temper expectations, that the work search requirement is that they perform one work search activity, apply for one job per week. That is the minimum that they can do. But they have to say where they applied and give the contact information, and it's, you can check up on it. So if they get an offer or they don't show up for the interview, that sort of thing, then it can affect their eligibility for the benefits. I think returning that work search requirement, there's some amount of the population that will be the signal, like, hey, the process before has changed. You can't just stay on unemployment. Work search is coming back. So what I don't know yet is when they put out the actual rules, will they be checking?
Yeah.
If I put on, hey, I put in this application with this employer and never did an interview, will they be checking with the employer? Would the employer be able to say they were a no-show, they didn't actually apply, or they applied but didn't show up for their first day of work? I mean, that type of follow-up accountability is going to be pretty important, I think, especially in the earlier stages. Well,
and said differently, if you offer someone a job, that should make them ineligible to stay on unemployment. A legitimate offer of a job. And without enforcement, someone could say, no thanks, and still continue to collect. So, hey, new unemployment numbers came out. So we do, that we have a little insight into which direction this whole thing is headed.
Right. So the unemployment numbers came out, and the unemployment rate ticked down a little bit to 4.9%. And, people always look at the rate and say, oh, good, it went down a little bit, generally good for the overall economy. But, it's a percentage. On the top of the fraction, you got the total number of people who are unemployed but looking for a job. On the bottom numbers is total size of the workforce, which is the number of people actually looking for a job. If you're not looking for a job, you don't count as unemployed. So that's just kind of a misconception. So while it's good that the unemployment rate came down, generally we consider that to be good news. And we saw some modest size shift or decline in the workforce month over month. So that diminishes a little bit. But then, I was thinking, as opposed to looking month by month, we see these little changes month by month. What does the workforce look like today compared to what the workforce looked like more than a year ago before the unemployment or before the pandemic? And there are 300,000 fewer people in the workforce in the first place. So in other words, 300,000 people that before were either working or available for work or searching for work, they counted as part of the workforce. That number is 300,000 fewer people today than it was before. And so as you see this struggle, this difficulty that employers are having finding people, it has a lot to do with the fact that the pool of people to hire from has shrunk that much.
Well, and I think it's an urgent felt need in a lot of cases that there just aren't people applying, and the labor shortage is acute. I mean, we've heard stories of restaurants that are closed for certain days that they like to be open because they just simply can't find enough people to come to work.
Yeah, and what we're hearing from again, it's somewhat anecdotal, but when the association has as many members as ours, our anecdotes add up, and they really do mean something. We can identify trends and themes, and there's been substantial increases in pay and benefits that have been offered to try and find that point where you can get workers, and they just don't have workers out there to hire. So the part that it's hard to compete with is not the pay. Unemployment, the equivalency of unemployment with the federal support is $16.55 an hour. But a lot of jobs are paying more than that now, but it's hard to compete with 20 weeks off, right? I mean, nobody gets 20 weeks off in a regular job. So if time off, if you can live on $16.55 an hour and you get 100% time off, then I think that's the for up to 20 weeks a year. I think that's the part where businesses are having a really hard time competing.
All right, fascinating thing happening with the state's budget. And today the House Fiscal Agency met. They're kind of they make the economic forecast for the state. The Senate Fiscal Agency did the same thing earlier in the week. Maybe to set it up, the state's fiscal year is October 1 to September 30. That's a little unusual. So they were making a projection about how this year that we are well into is going to end, and what next year might look like. It is $2.9 billion, what the House Fiscal Agency said will end this year's budget in the black, 2.9 billion, and estimated next year to be 1.8 billion. That is really kind of unprecedented, and that's state money. That is not the federal money that has come rushing into our state. That's state revenue driven in part by the federal revenue that's coming into our state. I guess, first of all, your comment just on that phenomenon, and secondly, what are we seeing in terms of help for small business that may come out of that?
Well, these are unprecedented numbers. It's a year ago, it looked like there might be a bottoming out of the economy and therefore a bottoming out of state revenue that is tied to all of these economic activities. And really the opposite has happened. So the federal government spend, it resulted in higher consumer spending, higher personal income over this fiscal year that the state is in. So they're closing the year. We've talked a lot, the federal government is sending loads and loads, piles of money, so much that local governments and state government have got to figure out how to spend it. I mean, so I'm not talking about that. They've got all that money. This is literally the surplus that they're going to close this year with. So think of it, if you're a small business owner, this is your income statement, the profit at the bottom line. So in the state's general fund, their state has two main funds. They have many, many funds, but two big ones. The general fund will close out the year with almost $3 billion left over. So a surplus in the general fund. And then normally that, the revenue comes in one year, spent the next year. There's not a big surplus. If there is, maybe $100 million or so. In this case, almost $3 billion. And then in the school aid fund, they estimated about $2 billion. So almost $5 billion in kind of leftover money from this fiscal year, in addition to all of the money that is expected to be received going forward from the feds. And they've got a whole nother round that they're talking about coming up in terms of spending on what they're calling infrastructure, but it's not the sort of things that we might generally consider to be infrastructure. It's got some roads and bridges, but mainly social service infrastructure is what they're talking about for much of the spending to come. But as we look at these numbers, how staggering it is, just how much extra money government has right now, it does, as we look at inflation concerns and shortages that have been created in so many different areas, I think this really does need to, we need to elevate this conversation about, is it wise for the federal government to pile even more on top of all of this money that is already coming government's way?
Well, I see a fight coming, and a political, some political posturing coming over that over the next couple of years. And obviously our lane as small business will stay on top of what may happen for small business. It's interesting on Monday's briefing, you talked to Mike Burns, and a big part of that was how do you apply the rules in your own workplace, given what we know right now? And, sort of everybody wears a mask, nobody wears a mask, only the vaccinated don't wear a mask, only the people who haven't been must. Those are questions that the employers are going to have to think about. There was an interesting decision announced today. The Mackinac Policy Conference is a very large conference on Mackinac Island, about 2,000 attendees packed into rooms. Imagine a conference that big on an island. And they announced today that the requirement is going to be, you must be vaccinated to come to that conference. I think an interesting precedent to watch, to say, in order to attend anything, that you'll have to be vaccinated.
Yeah, and here's what I kind of expect to happen on that. I mean, the pandemic is going to go one way or another. Either we're exiting it here, other countries get it under control, and the pandemic is behind us. If that's how it turns out over the summer and heading into the fall, I wouldn't be surprised if big conferences like that right now had to make a decision. So if the decision has to be made right now, they're going to limit it just to people who get it a vaccination as opposed to trying to police masks. So as of now, they make that decision. I think if things go the way that I sort of think they're going to, you can always pull back on rules like that. And so if the numbers in the summer get as low as I think they are about to get, I think that heading into the fall in the conference series that happened, I don't want to speak for Detroit Regional Chamber. Obviously, they've got their own decision-making process, but I think that these are like decisions that are constantly being reevaluated. And if you're planning a conference out, you got to make a decision today. They did the best they could with the information they had at the time. That will probably be re-reviewed before the date comes.
All right. Well, interesting things to watch. We'll try to keep them on the table at this briefing. Appreciate you watching today. This briefing was brought to you by Health Screen and Healthy Visitor. Just a reminder that at least for the time being, daily screening of employees and visitors is still a requirement, and Health Screen and Healthy Visitor is the tool that can help you do that. You can find out more at healthycomply.com. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you on Monday.
See you on Monday, everybody.